Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2023 Purina Masterclass Series. This is our first one. We're happy to have you. We're really grateful to Purina Pro Plan, Ray Vogt, Carl Gunzer, great team at Purina that keeps all of this going. And we appreciate their support and all they do for all of our dog sports. Tonight, well, I've got Dr. Janelle Appel, good friend of mine. We were just talking a few minutes ago. We met 12 years ago, almost within the next week. Dr. Appel came to a Snowbird Retriever Club meeting and enlightened us about the value of what we're going to talk about tonight. It's changed the game. It's changed the retriever game. You're going to love what you hear. We're really excited about it. Janelle, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Pat.
No muscle left behind. Conditioning the canine athlete?
Yes.
So I've got to ask you, and I'm thinking maybe I even asked you 12 years ago, what brought you to the world, of veterinary medicine, especially the world of veterinary sports medicine? Would you describe a little bit about your passion and why are you so passionate about that?
So, from the time I was a little kid, I always wanted to be a veterinarian. But growing up and going through the process of schooling and becoming an athlete myself, the one thing for me that was always in the back of my mind was that I wanted to do something different, that I wanted to not just be a normal veterinarian. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what that looked like when I was 12 years old. But as I progressed through school and then in the aftermath of that, working with athletes through my college education at a rehab facility, I started to realize clearly that it's what I've loved to do, work with dogs that had injuries, that were basically had jobs that they needed to get back to, whether that be working dogs, police dogs, or true dogs that play sports. And myself as an athlete, I was injured at an early age in my career, and it was rehab and conditioning that helped me get through that period of time and get back to sport. Not at the college level I was hoping for, but I was able to salvage what was left of my shoulder. And so, in working with these athletes when I was doing my undergraduate work, really made me think about that process and how I felt when I couldn't play. And these dogs, they didn't understand why this was happening to them, why they couldn't be out doing what they enjoyed to do. So working to get them back to that was something that brought a different side of veterinary medicine to me. And I realized there was so much more we could do outside of just general medicine. And so I pushed to become certified as a rehab veterinarian. And then from there, started working specifically with athletes and ended up primarily now running my own show.
So you talk about rehabilitation, but a big part of the theme for tonight is prevention, correct?
Absolutely.
I remember a discussion with Mike Lardy a few years after you started working closely with the Hanjum team. And I asked Mike, what do you think the single biggest reason that you've had a jump in success in the last year or two? And he didn't hesitate. He said it was because of you. It was because of the things you initiated. I have learned and watched a lot of the great dogs are 9 and 10 years old. Their brains are right. Their bodies have betrayed them, I suppose is a way of putting it. But the things that we're going to talk about are the things that keep these dogs feeling good, being healthy, so they can still compete. So let's talk about tonight's agenda.
We're going to talk about endurance conditioning, which consists of both a swimming and a roading program.
Mm-hmm.
We're also going to look at strength and balance exercises. as well as resistance exercises and proprioceptive exercises.
You've got some thoughts on the benefits of conditioning. Would you expand on that for us a little bit?
I think the number one benefit across the board is prevention of injury, and that's what we're all looking to do, both in human and our canine athletes. Obviously, we're looking to improve strength and overall endurance, but that comes along with performance enhancement. If we can get through a test easier because we have now built up our endurance to be able to do so, built up our strength, then that does, in the end, enhance performance. The other part of that, which is also a part of what I believe is performance enhancement, is simply the mental stress relief. Just like when we go out to the gym, we go for a run. Same with dogs. It's a mental release in a way, and brings cortisol levels down, and it helps dogs actually have a better relationship, I think, with their owners, handlers, trainers, because they're with them in a very different environment. It's something that's fun for them to do. They look forward to doing it, and there's no pressure involved mentally, which I think is a huge benefit.
As a professional, when I initiated my conditioning program that Dr. Ollie Reynolds set up for me when I was at Spree Kennels, that's the one thing that I really noticed. The relationship with the dogs changed. It definitely deepened. I almost felt like it became a bit of a pack member. And I look forward to it. I look forward to it today. So we've got some videos we're going to go through. And we're going to play those videos for you, and then we're going to comment on them. So we're going to get started with that, and I think you're going to enjoy these. They're going to be very educational.
So in this video, we'll see the process of applying a harness to the dog as we begin the roading process. This dog in particular has not been roaded in several weeks. As you can see, he's very excited to get started. And as a single dog, this is normally how I begin the process with a dog who has never roaded before. This way they can get used to the pace of the four-wheeler, how it feels to be pulled and pushed against the bungee cord. And that way we can allow the dog to understand the feeling of being next to the four-wheeler and also the pressure underneath the chain and bungee. As you can see, when we first start out here, this dog's inclination is to pull against the bungee. This is very normal, specifically for a dog that either has never roaded before or has not roaded in a long time. Over the period of a few minutes, you can see this dog settles into more of a moderate trot, around 7 to 8 miles an hour for this long-legged dog.
So we just finished watching Thor. Thor is 5 years oldish.
About 5.
You mentioned in the video that he hadn't been roaded in a while. He was super excited. He was pulling and barking and all worked up. And he was frustrating a little bit at first.
Sure.
But how did you, for example, you just kind of slowed it down and let him fatigue slow him down, and then he settled into a pace? I noticed you were kind of talking to him and encouraging him, saying heel, trying to get him to quit pulling so hard.
Absolutely.
Do you use obedience style commands to try to accomplish that?
So typically in the beginning process where a dog has never actually been exposed to roading, what I prefer to do is have them very close to me next to the four-wheeler. So in this video, you'll see that he's actually on the outside bungee, and that's mostly for sake of the video to get an idea of what his gait pattern looks like.
Mm-hmm.
However, when they first start out, the ability to reach down and potentially grab their collar or grab the bungee or talk to them makes a huge difference in them understanding what you need them to do. So I typically start out at a walk, just getting them used to the pull and the push of the bungee and how it feels to be very close to the four-wheeler. Some dogs do not like to be close and they prefer to be on the outside. And these are all things you learn as you work with your dog specifically.
Here, Cara.
There are many kennels that have 26 dogs to get through on a weekend. So we go up to 4 to 6 dogs sometimes in one roading session. And a big part of that is matching these dogs appropriately and making sure that they're all pacing the same. So we want them to be at a moderate trot, which is around 5 to 6 miles an hour naturally for shorter legged dogs, and 7 to 8 miles an hour for longer legged dogs.
You try to match.
Yeah, see that the front two are about the same height. So these are all great talking points, you know, what you don't want to do, what you do want to do. Heel. See how hot she's getting compared to the other ones?
For most dogs, it takes 1 to 2 sessions for them to adjust and to learn the process. It's very interesting how quickly they pick it up. And they love it. They see the harness come out, and as you can see, Thor was doing, jumping around, barking, excited. And I'm not worried about the pulling initially. There's nothing wrong with pulling. However, I do want them to eventually settle into that trot, because that's the pace where we're going to build the most strength.
And I've worked 3 different dogs in the last couple of weeks that had never been conditioned before. And they all reacted a little differently. Some of them, just putting the harness on was foreign and made them uncomfortable. Once they settled in, I found the same thing that you just said, that I was surprised how they went from being a little panicky to actually enjoying it pretty rapidly.
Absolutely.
And I also noticed that once they got a little bit comfortable, there was actually a security with having other dogs with them.
For sure. And again, you learn over time which dogs, especially in a kennel setting, prefer to be next to each other. Some dogs have an aversion to other dogs. And it's very interesting to go through the process of beginning a roading program with a kennel, because you learn these nuances of the dogs, where they like to be on the bungee, whether they want to be in front or they prefer being in back. And you'll see this progress and play out as you go through each week in the roading process. And those are things that you just learn over time. Nobody gets it right the first time, but the most important thing is that the dog understands what you're asking them to do. And at all times, it's about safety. So that's the reason why we have the harness system we do. Many people like to free road, which is great in certain circumstances. However, it can be dangerous. Dogs will dart in front and in back of the four-wheeler. And also, they are able to stop and start their pace when they're free roading. We're not keeping them in a consistent trot. And the trot is the most important part of this structured roading program, because it is A, the one pace that allows the dog to strengthen, and B, allows us to visualize any sort of gait abnormality or lameness. It's the one pace that's going to show us whether the dog is sore, short striding, or not using a leg correctly.
So you're trying to match the size of the dogs, their stride length.
Yes.
So I found when I was doing dogs, I typically had 4 females together. But when I put four males that maybe didn't know each other very well, it can be a little touchy.
Absolutely.
Hey, you don't want to fight.
That's right. And many times in that situation, it's all about who goes on first. And so what I found is the dog that is actually the least aggressive or willing to lash out per se, they go on the bar first. And I always bring the dog that I'm most concerned about on last, because that way I can control that dog when the other three I know are not going to be willing to make the first move per se.
And I noticed at first there may be a little bit of growling, rumbling, but once they got in a routine and they started more concerned about just running,
Right.
everything settled out. And I think it was actually good for them to learn to coexist with other males that they didn't know in close quarters, and their whole body language softened. So what kind of time are you going to start with? What's your starting time on this dog? Hasn't been roaded for months. He was probably at home over the holidays. How long are you going to go on the first day?
So that's a great question. For a dog that has never experienced roading, I always start with 5 minutes, no matter what kind of condition they're in. I want to assess them based on how they heat up, their recovery process, but I also want to give them time to work into that gait. If you do shorter segments, 1 or 2 minutes, you don't really allow them to get into a natural, like you said, comfortable pattern. So 5 minutes is the minimum time, but for a dog like Thor, who's had multiple years of roading, so even though he's been not roaded for several weeks, he's coming back into the program with experience and also with a little bit more endurance and conditioning than some dogs that have never done the program. So with him, I would start at 10 minutes and work up to about a 30 minutes maintenance road, which would be about once a week maintenance, sometimes twice a week, depending on the trial schedule and also the test schedule for that week.
How much would you increase a week?
So through the process of a dog that has not conditioned, I add 2 minutes per week, which would ultimately equal out to a minute per session if you were building by using 2 sessions a week. That's going to get you about into an 8-week program to get to that maintenance level.
Now I use an app that maybe a biker might use or somebody jogging, and I set my phone right on the seat so I can translate what pace they're running at as to what speed we're going, and it allows me to identify, my time. So if I want to do 12 minutes, I know at 6 minutes I need to turn around.
Absolutely. And the terrain is a huge part of it. Not everyone has a humongous field with open space to be able to do this. So I know there are many people that I work with that have very small fields in which they have to make multiple circles in just one roading session. And that can become frustrating for the dog too, especially if they're having to go in a circle, just as much as the human gets frustrated with it. So I try to have longer stretches of the least amount of turning possible would be ideal, because you really keep the dog in that gait pattern versus having to constantly make turns.
One of my experiences with the long, slow distance type of conditioning was when I was in Alaska and I spent a year working with sled dogs. And it was truly amazing what they were capable of. And they actually worked on a hot walker style. It was a wheel. It was a circle. And they put 8 dogs on. And they would go 2 hours in one direction and then 2 hours in another direction. And you'd sit there for 4 hours, just making sure everything's safe. And those dogs were bred for running.
Sure.
And they were incredible athletes. But
Yeah.
it truly was something to see, to watch dogs pace themselves for that kind of period of time. So,
And you'll start to see in this video toward the end that Thor is actually getting tired and getting hot. And signs that we look for to tell us that are the length of the tongue. So you'll see that toward the end of the video, the end of his tongue is curling up and seems to be a lot longer than it was initially. That's the body's way of trying to get as much oxygen into the bloodstream. So the end of the tongue curls, and that's one way to know the dog is getting warm. Some of the other little nuances that I've learned over time is ear set and also the dog looking at you. So ears up, excited to go initially, and you'll see again with Thor, his ears are back, pinned, to his head toward the end of the video. And also they tend to start to look at you more. So instead of looking straight out, excited to go and get to the next place, a dog that starts to turn and just take a slight glance at you, it is their way of saying, I'm tired, I've had enough. So these are all little things that you can pick up on to know when the dog is tiring, getting too warm.
So it brings up an great point. I mean, safety is paramount.
Yes.
It's important to know what their threshold is.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do if you're 10 minutes out, you're still 4 minutes back from your starting point, and you see signs of that?
Yep. So great question. There's several things you can do. One, if you're near water, I recommend driving them over to the pond, letting them off the four-wheeler, letting them take a break into the water, cool them off,
Mm-hmm.
bring them back on. Maybe you start walking instead of trotting immediately. Maybe you walk all the way back, depending on how hot they got. The other option is to simply take them off and put them on the four-wheeler and ride them back and do not allow them to continue even walking at that point. Sometimes when we have warm days, we do actually get them wet first. So we'll either hose them down or go immediately to the pond, let them all get in, and then hook them up, depending on how warm it's going to be or humidity levels as well. But it's a judgment call for sure, and you have to know your dog. That's really the base of it.
Well, and one of the important things to know, not just in roading, but when you're working them, to know what those signs are and know what their thresholds are so you can keep them safe.
Right.
Because these dogs will kill themselves. They love to retrieve so much, they're not going to quit. So, it's up to us to be their steward.
100%.
So, great stuff. All right, great. Thank you. So let's talk about the other form of endurance conditioning, swimming. What's your experience with that?
So swimming is probably the best whole body exercise for both human and canine athlete alike. I think the general misconception that we have with our dogs is that it's easy. It's easy on the body. It takes all the force off the joints because they're in the water, which is true, it does. However, it puts pressure on the soft tissues. So the dog is not only having to propel themselves forward in the water, keeping their head above water, so the flotation aspect, but also driving themselves through a body of resistance, which is the water itself. So it's actually a very difficult exercise. And many times when I start the form of conditioning in the water, I actually start at very, very low levels of time. So I might even start 2 to 3 minute intervals and maybe do 2 or 3 repetitions of that with a 5-minute break in between. Many of our dogs are not in the water for an extended period without a break. So they might have a long bird that they're marking in the water. However, the actual swim time may be 5-6 minutes from start to finish. And then they get a break in between retrieves on the line. So the aspect of endurance conditioning is to keep the dog in the water for an extended period of time, a time that would be longer than any test they will ever encounter. And that's a way to ensure that they are in the best shape possible to get through that test.
Do you ever combine land roading and swimming in the same session?
Absolutely. And specifically on warm days, I love to do that. So I might do 10 to 15 minutes on land and then jump in the kayak and finish off with a 10-minute swim. And that's a wonderful way to not only interval train, but also deal with the temperatures in situations where you want to condition, you want to have a little bit of that heat stress, but obviously not put them in a dangerous environment.
One of the things that I guess it wasn't obvious to me to begin with, and I had a discussion with Mike and some of the other folks, is the value of these dogs actually becoming better swimmers and being more comfortable in the water, and how that benefited in their training. For retrievers, half of what they do is in the water, and they're typically not very comfortable with that.
Absolutely, and you'll see in this video as Mike is kayaking multiple dogs and they're following behind him. These are dogs that love this conditioning. They think it's great to follow behind a boat, and they also love the competitive side of it, which is when you have multiple dogs in the water at one time, they do try to compete against each other. They do try to swim faster than the other one, and we want that. We want to see that. And in fact, when we're trying to pair up dogs together in groups, we always want to pair them in their pace in the water. I don't want a straggler that I'm constantly having to either circle back for or call for. I want them to have that level of competition amongst themselves, and it really provides an even better form of exercise. So 100%, it's whole body, but also mentally speaking. And like you said, on the performance end, I've had many dogs that have been very uncomfortable in the water, completely changed their attitude after a conditioning protocol in the water.
So I just assumed that anytime a dog had an injury, the first thing exercise was water, and it was a great way to bring a dog back. But that's really not always the case, is it?
That's right. We have to be very careful about what we are reconditioning or rehabilitating. If this is a joint injury in a dog, then water is a positive form of rehab. However, that said, anything can be used in excess. So even though we don't have the pounding through the joint as we would in a roding scenario with a dog that has a bad joint, we still have the repetition of the range of motion of that joint as the dog is swimming. So if I have a bad elbow and I am constantly extending and flexing, driving myself through the water, that simple repetition of flexion and extension can cause inflammation if I'm allowed to do that for an extended period. So it's not all cut and dry. Now, if I have a soft tissue injury, the water's going to put more stress on soft tissue because I'm using primarily my soft tissue to drive myself through the water.
So it doesn't matter whether it's a bicep tendon or a groin, those kinds of soft tissue injuries, you wouldn't necessarily go right to swimming.
That's correct. It would be a later stage of the rehabilitation process. I would actually use more land exercise, balance and strength and proprioceptive types of exercise versus water, and basically end that process in the water.
It's great stuff.
In this video, we're going to observe the process of introducing a dog to a land treadmill for the first time. This is something that's a great modality to use at home, specifically when we're unable to use other things like four-wheelers or kayaks. As you will see, this dog is on the treadmill for the very first time, and I'm very slowly getting her adjusted to what it feels like for the ground to move underneath her.
Here. Good job. Here. There you go. Good girl. Here. Good. Here. Come on. There you go. Come on. Good job. Come on. Good. Here. Good. That's good. Sit. Good job. Sit. Good. Okay.
So a lot of people don't have a four-wheeler, or maybe even the place to road. And we just watched the treadmill video. This dog had never been on a treadmill before. This treadmill is specifically designed for roading or exercising dogs.
That's correct. The treadmill we saw in the video is actually called a dog pacer treadmill, and it is specifically designed for canines. However, you do not need a canine-specific treadmill to exercise.
Okay.
So I have used human treadmills in the past many times, and I actually prefer the human treadmill, to be honest, simply because usually the belt is a little bit longer, and it also allows for a difference in incline. Some of them even decline. But for the canine pacer, it has a mild incline, but not severe. So it gives you the ability to change it, but not dramatically. So again, they're also more expensive than human treadmills and not necessary.
So if you have a treadmill,
Absolutely.
or you can pick one up at a garage sale, grab it.
For sure.
The one thing I noticed on that treadmill, the dial
Mm-hmm.
was in a position that you could do from the front.
Yes, that is the nice thing. As you see, I'm sitting right in front of the dog, and I have the ability to change the pace very easily by just reaching down. So that is the nice part versus a human treadmill where you'd have to be essentially straddling the dog to be able to change the level until the dog was used to being on the treadmill. This was her very first experience with it, and she did great. She took to it immediately. Now she's also very treat motivated, which helped. But many times just using praise and using something that the dog is excited about, whether that be a treat. Sometimes I'll even have them hold a bumper, and it helps them focus a little bit better and just maintain the pace. So it kind of depends on what excites the dog, but also does not overly excite to the point where they are not focusing on what we're asking them to do.
So in the beginning of the video, you just had her stand on the treadmill. You weren't even moving it. You were just getting her comfortable being there.
Getting her comfortable in the harness. I definitely like to have them hooked up, whether someone is holding a lead around them or someone is in front of them with them attached to a harness, something that gives us a little bit more control. Because obviously their first inclination is going to be to jump off or try to ride the treadmill back. And many dogs don't understand the concept of the ground moving underneath them. So it takes them some time to realize they need to start stepping forward. And many times they'll ride the treadmill back in the early stages. So I like having something that they're either hooked up to or another person holding on to them so we can give them the direction they need to understand what we're asking.
So how does 10 minutes of conditioning on a four-wheeler compare to 10 minutes on a treadmill?
Really, ideally, honestly, it doesn't matter. Now, again, you have the ability to road them in terrain. So you have that sort of not only mental aspect of being out and being free, per se, to run in the field, where the treadmill is more structured. But ultimately, it's still a job to them, and they do, after time, once they're used to the process, whether it be on the roading harness or on the treadmill, most dogs end up enjoying that process, and many of my dogs will jump on the treadmill when they see it, because they know that either they're getting treats, they're getting praise. It's something that's a positive thing for them.
Now, I know at a lot of rehabilitation facilities, they'll actually use an underwater treadmill.
Yes.
And that's for buoyancy and resistance, is that correct?
So it does provide resistance. It also provides the ability for dogs that may have an injury. As we rehabilitate them, the water is taking pressure off their joints. So it's allowing us to exercise them without putting excess pressure through their joints. And specifically for dogs that have neurologic issues, it offers us the ability to sort of replicate their gait in the water. Many times we're actually taking our hands and physically moving their limbs as the belt moves underneath them. And it's about gait retraining, proprioception, and making the brain remember where the legs are. So there's a lot of things you can do in regard to rehabilitation in an underwater treadmill. However, it's not necessary for a conditioning program.
Okay. Because I've had a few clients that actually just go and rent time at an underwater treadmill, not because their dog's injured, as their conditioning routine. Is there any more value to that versus a dry treadmill?
I think the value is if you don't have the ability to swim or road, it's a great adjuvant to have in a modality to have the ability to use. I have many clients that live, in the middle of a major city, and the only time they get to train is when they take the dog hours away. So to have the ability to still condition in some capacity is huge. And so yes, I would definitely recommend doing anything you could via balance and strengthening at a rehab facility or underwater treadmill conditioning.
And you would progress the 2 minutes a week just like you would if you were conditioning off of a four-wheeler.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, that's very good. Thank you.
In these next videos, I'm going to show you specific examples of both strengthening and resistance forms of exercise and conditioning. One is going to include a resistance band program with bands known as the Bico Sport Bands. The second video will show a dog wearing hind limb leg weights with a cuff and a 4-ounce weight.
Sit. Here. Sit. So the sports band is a resistance band. So this is going to create resistance for the quadricep and the hamstring as the dog is walking. Comes in 3 different resistances. Light and green is the lightest, and then it goes to orange, and then it goes to blue. So we start with the lightest, we work through the program, start with a 5-minute walk, add a couple minutes a week, work up to 20 minutes, just like the weights, real easy. Then we go to the next resistance, do the same thing. So this is going to take you several months to get up to the top level of resistance. If you've ever been to the gym and worked with resistance bands, you'll know how difficult it is. And that's exactly what we're looking for. So not only is this building hind limb strength, it's also helping with proprioception, which is something we don't talk about a lot in these guys. Where our legs are in space, especially young dogs, right? They're all over the place with their bodies. This connects the brain to the legs. It says, hey, remember these legs are still here. So when we're doing exercises in the field, when we're doing exercises like this, it makes them more body aware. And body aware in the field is very important to prevent injury. Because especially as a young dog, if you're more aware of where your body is in space, you can adjust. And when you start to fall or you go off balance, your body can correct itself easier and faster. And that's the idea behind proprioceptive exercises. Athletes of all kinds, especially professional athletes, they practice proprioceptive types of exercise all the time. So this band attaches to a cup. And the cup comes down, and it's a Velcro cup, so it's easy to put on. The cup attaches between the toes and the tarsus, so right in the middle. And it is padded, so it's very comfortable. Then it comes up and it attaches to a D-ring harness. The harness comes with the system. So this way, as the dog walks, sit. When she extends her legs backward, she's going to have resistance to her hamstrings as well as her quadriceps. Heel. Heel. So again, this is the lightest resistance. So you can see it's very easy for her. She's not having any type of resistance or stress when she pulls back. Once you get up to the highest one, you'll notice that the bands are very, very tight as they walk. Here. So this product is from Annie Motion, ANI, MOTION products.com. This band is originally designed for neurologic patients, patients that had a lack of proprioception or feeling in their hind end, and it helped them to walk more normally. And so we took that design and developed a higher resistance level for athletes.
So this dog is wearing an ankle weight system known as the Canine Icer. Canine Icer product comes with a cuff, Velcro cuff, and a 2 and a 4 ounce weight. A pouch that goes inside the cuff and velcros just above the ankle or the tarsal joint of the dog. We use this product for hind limb strengthening, as most dogs bear 60% of their weight on their front limbs. So this is an excellent way to help a dog strengthen, specifically after injury, recovering from a surgery, but also as a conditioning program.
So we just watched the session with the Beco bands. Do you have anything you want to add to this? Because you had a great explanation. That was you were doing a demonstration for a seminar, and I think it was very comprehensive. What else would you like to add and tell people about the Beco bands and their value?
So I think the great thing about the bands is, again, like we were discussing with the underwater treadmill, it gives people the ability to condition their dogs without necessarily a bunch of equipment or a bunch of land. Essentially, all you're doing is walking your dog, and that, for many people, is pretty easy to get done during the day. And the nice thing about the bands is they're easy to apply, so anybody can do it, and it doesn't take much to get the dog adjusted to it either. Even within a first session of walking with them, they adjust to it, they realize what's on their legs, and it's as if there's nothing there after a few minutes. So it's amazing how quickly they will respond. But I think the greatest thing about it is the amount of muscle mass increase that I've seen by using these bands. And this is really why I love to promote them, because I used them for years in rehabilitation alone with dogs that were coming out of surgery and trying to find ways to increase their hind limb strength. As we discussed earlier in one of the videos, most dogs bear 60% of their weight on their forelimbs. So specifically when they have a hind limb injury, they're offloading even more weight onto their front end. So our goal is to promote hind limb strength by increasing weight bearing. And these bands allow us to do that in a very easy way. We're not pressuring the dog to do anything specific. They're simply walking, and it's creating resistance, which makes them contract their quadriceps and hamstrings in a consistent manner and increase muscle girth very quickly. So over a period of 4 weeks, I can increase mass anywhere from 1/2 to 1 centimeter, sometimes more. And as a rehab therapist, that's a pretty big deal. So now we've taken that concept and introduced sport bands, which essentially have a greater resistance for dogs that are not injured. And again, same concept, increasing muscle mass over time.
Is it possible, if you don't have a place to walk, to use the Beco bands on a slow speed on a treadmill?
100%. I do it all the time. Again, with rehabilitation dogs, sometimes we'll even do it in the underwater treadmill. So you can certainly use it in that manner. And dogs, specifically on treadmills, take to it quite well.
So the other thing that we saw in that video are the ankle weights.
Yes.
Would you tell us a little bit about those?
So the ankle weights, again, the concept is to increase loading of the hind end. So by putting weight on above the ankles, which essentially the ankle is holding the cuff on, although it's a Velcro cuff, the ankle helps it from slipping down. So the 2 ounce weight is where we always start, simply to get the dog used to wearing something on the leg. Many times when you first put them on, the dog will high step, thinking that they have something weird on their legs. So I just want to get them adjusted to it without having the more significant weight, which is the 4 ounce weight. And that's what I'm using more for strengthening. So I'll start a dog at the 2 ounce weight for the first week, just getting them adjusted to wearing them, and then go to the 4 ounce, and over time, just like the Beco bands, increase the amount of time simply walking, not trotting or not running at all. And many times, once I get up to a maintenance level, I'll start to use the weights during exercises. So during some strengthening and proprioceptive exercise, I'll actually have them wear the weights as we move through those.
So 4 ounces is the heaviest you use.
Correct.
You just increase the duration of the exercise.
Absolutely.
Very good. Thank you.
In these upcoming videos, we're going to see the process of introducing a dog to a peanut ball, which is a form of proprioceptive exercise that helps to increase core strength. We'll see examples of a dog first introduced to the ball, as well as a dog that has been repeatedly on the ball doing multiple exercises.
Come on up. Come on up. Come on. You got it. Good boy.
So we're just introducing the dog to the ball slowly with just the front limbs, so they understand what it feels like to be on the ball. And I may start to do a little bit of weight shifting where I'm moving the ball back and forth, trying to transfer weight to the back end.
Boy, what a good boy. Come on. Oh, good job. The hair's right. Come on. Yes. You're okay. Come here, bud. Right here. It's right here. Come on up.
So we're going to try to trick him into getting totally on the ball by advancing the treat forward, so he has to bring his entire body on it.
You got it. Good. Good job. Good boy.
And they may not be comfortable enough to stand right away, so you just kind of let them adjust to it.
Here. Got it. Come on. You got it. Here. You got it. There you go. Good boy. Good dog. Okay. What a good boy.
So this is a huge
job.
thing.
That's a good boy. Grab that dog. Good job. Good. There you go. You got it. Good boy.
Yeah. It's much easier to run around.
You go. Good job. Good boy. This way. Good dog.
Good job.
Good boy. You're doing good. He's like,
So in this video, Dr. Sarah Love is showing us a rehabilitation patient who is well adapted to the peanut ball. She is showing strength and core conditioning and how well this dog balances on all 4 limbs. And as the dog goes to sit, as it's a difficult exercise, she helps the dog back up into a stand. And from there, she transitions into a weight shifting pattern, pushing the dog off balance very gently from side to side, forward, backwards, simply transitioning the dog's weight from different limbs. This allows the dog to use more of their core musculature and build strength in their abdominal muscles as well as the muscles along their spine.
Well, we're covering lots of stuff here, and I hope you're enjoying it. Well, we just watched videos of 3 different dogs on balance balls. The first 2, you were just getting them accustomed to it. And then the third dog was an experienced dog. What did you see in those videos that our audience should be aware of?
I think the most important thing to remember is you just need to be patient. You know, this is a device that is very foreign to the dog, but also it's something that is completely unstable underneath them. So taking the time to make sure that they understand what you're asking them to do, but also that you're not pushing them to do more than they're ready for. So I always start with simply bringing the dog up to the ball, letting them smell it, and then asking them to put their front legs on the ball. This is the easiest form of introduction because they still have 2 legs on the ground, on solid ground, so they feel somewhat stable. And you can do many exercises in this way with just their forelimbs on the ball, because again, it's all about balance, right? So if we're pushing them off balance by using something that is not steady, we are helping to increase proprioception, which is where my feet are in space, and also strength. So we start with that process, forelimbs first, and then we advance the whole dog onto the ball. This is the hardest exercise for a dog to undertake, and you'll see in the one video when Dr. Love is helping the dog stand as she wants to sit time and time again. It's because the dog is having to use her entire core to balance herself on the peanut. And all 4 limbs, all the muscles of all 4 limbs are contracting at the same time to keep her balance. So it's a very difficult exercise. And ideally, we work the dog up in small segments, 30-second segments, get off the ball, work up another 30 seconds, maybe do 3 or 4 repetitions of that. And then later in the week, we might come back and do a 45-second segment or a 1-minute segment. But I slowly increase time because it's an incredibly difficult exercise.
So what would be the maximum time for a dog that's used to being on the ball?
I typically work most dogs up to a 5-minute stand, and that's not when they're doing any other form of exercise. So what that means is they're simply standing on all 4 limbs, like you saw in the video of Dr. Love's dog. But you can do other exercises such as cookies, what we call cookies to the side, which is essentially moving the dog's head in the direction of one side of their body or the other. So when they turn their head to the right, they're shifting weight to their left hind. When they're turning to the left, they're shifting to their right hind. So you can do simple weight shifting exercises as they're standing on the ball. And then you can do even greater resistance by holding up a limb and asking them to balance on 3 legs.
What were you using to encourage the dog to get on the ball?
So I was using treats for these dogs, very 1-calorie, they were called puffs, which are essentially like popcorn to the dog, but anything that they can grab small pieces of. So a lot of times I'll even use the kibble. So we're not, if we're doing these exercises in multiple days a week, multiple segments, I'm not increasing the calorie intake of the dog. I'm using what they would normally be getting in their meal to entice them. But basically whatever the dog is accepting of and whatever lures them the best, that's what I'm going to use.
So once they get accustomed to it, then you no longer use food treats or...
That's correct. Most of the time, once I get them used to standing, they do not require treats unless I'm doing some of those exercises we talked about, specifically the cookie weight shifting exercises when I need them to follow a treat so they are shifting their body appropriately. But yes, actually, there are a few clients that have showed me videos of their dogs standing on the ball with a bumper in their mouth or even a food bowl.
So what kind of time might I expect it to take for a dog to get comfortable on the ball?
I would build up over a 6 to 8 week time period. I don't typically do ball work more than once to twice a week maximum.
That was my next question. How often do you do it? Excellent. Well, thank you. So we just finished talking about the balance balls, and you were using the treats. Of course, you were using the Purina treats, isn't that Goes without saying, I assume.
100% all the time.
Okay, well, because our friends at Purina, you know, they're why we're here,
Absolutely.
and they provide a great product.
The walk is the only gait pattern where there are 3 paws on the ground at all times. The normal footfall order is right rear, right front, left rear, left front. The hind limbs always move first, followed by a front limb on the same side. This is the only gait pattern that is symmetrical and for which the forelimbs and the hind limbs are not assisted in weight bearing by the contralateral limb. This is what allows us to detect lameness. The canter is a gait pattern that has 2 different styles, transverse and rotary. The transverse footfall is right rear, right front, all together, or left rear, left front. The rotary footfall is right rear, left front. The rotary canter gives a dog a rolling appearance, which is easily mistaken for lameness. The run gait pattern, or better known as gallop, uses both the power of the abdomen and the spine together. The footfall order is as follows. Front limbs leave the ground, followed by complete flexion of the spine. Hind limbs advance underneath the body and then strike the ground. The hind limbs then push off the ground, and there is then complete spinal extension, where there is a moment of suspension when all limbs are off the ground at one time.
So, the video we just watched was the gait patterns. What's important about that? Why do I need to know what the gait patterns are?
So I really wanted to bring this into the conversation specifically because as people are starting to introduce their dogs to the roading process, I get a lot of questions about what pace are you really looking for? So I wanted people to understand what these paces actually look like. And specifically the trot, because this is the one pace we want the dog to be in during a roading session. Again, like we talked about before, not only because it builds strength, but also because it allows us to see gait abnormality and lameness the best.
So one of the most valuable things when you're roading and you see the dog in that trot, you mentioned identifying lameness that isn't obvious. I've always heard the statement down on sound, and that has to do with them bobbing their head. Would you explain that a little bit more clearly for me?
Absolutely. So this is when a dog is exhibiting lameness, typically see more in the front end, where they tend to try to stay away from putting full weight through the leg that is injured or sore. And the way they're able to do that is to lift their head away from the ground as that leg is touching. So as they go to place the leg down that is injured or sore, they simply pull their head away to not bear full weight through that limb. So in real time, what that looks like is at what we call a head bob, which means they place the lame leg down and the head comes up. When they come down with the head, that's the sound leg because they're able to put most of their weight through the normal leg. So down on sound comes into play with the dog that has no issue bearing full weight through that limb.
Right foot goes down, head goes down with it. You identify it's the left limb that's exhibiting the pain.
That's correct. And that's why some of these slow motion videos, which is what we showed throughout these different paces, are very helpful. Specifically, if you're alone and you're roading and you're unsure about the gait pattern, you can take a slow motion video even on your phone. And I have many clients send me videos, and it's helpful because I can see in slow motion what's happening with the gait. And down on sound is one of those easy things to see.
Well, certainly early injury detection is huge in keeping, dogs, competitive dogs, competing. And these dogs, their desire to retrieve and chase game and do all the things they do is so intense that when they really start showing pain and it's super obvious, they're really hurt.
Absolutely.
And when they're in a roping situation, there's not the prey drive factor, and it certainly, I can see where it definitely shows it better. I noticed the dog, it was difficult to have that dog do the third one, the canter. Why is that so hard to display and to stay, for a dog to stay in that pace?
Well, I think it's typically one of those things that we see when the dog is actually coming back with the bird. And it's a difficult pace to stay in because there's two different leads going on at the same time. And like we described, there's a transverse and there's a rotary, and each dog is a little bit different in how they undertake that appearance. But more than anything, it actually is the easiest gait pattern for the dog other than the simple walk, simply because they're advancing their hind limbs along with their forelimbs in a very uninhibited way. So in other words, it doesn't allow them to put forth a ton of effort to advance their body forward. Where in a trot, they have to use two limbs at all times to advance themselves forward.
So that's what happens. They tend to want to go into a canter when you're roding, and that's when you slow down and force
That's
them.
when we slow down, absolutely. The other abnormal gait that we will see a lot is called a pace, in which the dog will use one side of their body consistently and then the other. In other words, the footfall would be right front, right hind, touching the ground at the same time, and then the left front, left hind touches the ground. So as in a pacing horse, it's one side of the body and then the other. And that is usually a gait pattern we see in a dog that either has a physical problem or has a gait abnormality from...
Well, then you've got, just the full-out run, which we showed.
Yes.
And you talked about that's where at times it's full flexion. Would you describe what's going on in a full run for me again one more time?
Yeah, and I really love the gallop or the run, specifically at a slow motion pace on video, because you can appreciate the amount of stress that the dog undertakes through their spine. Because through this process, we have a complete flexion of the spine as the feet go under the dog, and then full extension in a very short period of time throughout the gait. So the enormous pressure that the dogs undertake on their spine while they're running full out across the field and trying to keep their feet underneath them is just incredible. And you can see this very clearly through the dog galloping in the slow motion video.
And I mentioned earlier, the time I had spent in Alaska with the world of sled dogs, and that's the time where I learned these different gait patterns, and it was really interesting, and it's great to hear you talk about it, and thank you.
Absolutely.
So we're going to get to some questions. I know we've had a full evening, lots of information, but there's some great questions that we'd like to get to, and we're going to get to them very shortly. Are you staying with us, everybody? We appreciate you being here. And we're going to plug Purina again because they're great people, and we appreciate their support in all of this. Got some great questions here. And I'm going to give you a few. See what Dr. J has to say about this. First question says, we have field dogs that compete in pointing dog hunt tests and field trials. You emphasized taking dogs for a long walk. To be honest, we never take our dogs for a walk on a leash. We live in a rural area. We have no sidewalks. We either run our dogs on our acreage at the state game area. I've really never felt that a leash walk would exercise my dogs. Am I missing something?
Great question. So the one thing I'll say to that point is if you've ever walked an hour with your dog, you will come to find out that it's a lot longer than you think. And it's actually very tiring for you and the dog. Many times I have dogs work up to an hour walk coming out of a rehab program. And I actually call it the limping dog diet, because not only does the dog benefit, but also the human ends up losing a little as well. I think walking is underrated for sure. And again, it's all about a consistent pace. So we're trying to maintain heart rate, and whether that be at a fast walk or a trot, that is a form of conditioning and strengthening. And so just like human walking protocols, it is something that can be very beneficial, specifically for people that don't have the ability to do a roading or even a treadmill program.
Good answer. Good answer. Do you have any suggestions for conditioning dogs to handle heat better? My breed, German Wirehair Pointers, are cool weather loving dogs. They don't handle the heat well unless they have access to water. Is there anything they can do to improve their response in warmer temperatures?
So the ironic answer to that is conditioning, ultimately. However, in my experience, there has been many dogs over time that I've felt have a predisposition to just running hotter in general, whether that be a genetic predisposition somewhere in the familial line, or a dog that has overheated once in the past. We tend to see that they do tend to have the ability to overheat quicker after that happens. So certainly we know that certain dogs definitely have more of an issue. But what I would say to that is a little bit like we talked about before, making sure that if we're in a warm environment, that we're giving the dog the ability to cool, whether that's placing them in water before we start conditioning, or allowing them to have access to water by placing them in the water in the middle of our conditioning session to cool them down. So there are definitely ways we can help the dog and also not push them. If we are seeing those signs of the curl of the tongue, the dog's ears back plastered against their head, constantly looking at us, changing pace on their own, lagging behind, these are all signs of a dog that's fatiguing. So we just need to be very aware of our dog and make sure that we are making the strides to understand that point that we need to quit.
I've worked with a number of dogs that get hot very quickly when they're working, when they're doing their job, retrieving. But then I'll take that same dog in a roading atmosphere, and their stamina is way better than I expected.
Yes, and it's difficult and frustrating because there's an element of adrenaline that we just can't surpass in terms of our dogs getting through tests, even though they could be in the best condition possible on the outside. When we add that adrenaline element in, they get themselves so worked up that we can't really get past that to a certain extent. So with those dogs, honestly, the most important thing for them is to be in the best possible condition, because they're the dogs that tend to get themselves in trouble faster. And that may be the dog that I do make sure gets wet, even on the cooler days, just to give us a little bit of a one-up.
Is there any value to getting acclimated to the heat a little bit? Because I actually did some stuff on humid days and hot days. I do a roading session, I do a shorter one. But it felt, at least to me, like those dogs were better prepared on those weekends that the temperatures were hot and they had to run a field trial.
It's a huge, huge issue. And I think where I've seen it the most in terms of the difference in dogs that are conditioned and are not is exactly what you said at a weekend trial, and a hot weekend trial specifically. And I remember taking dogs through a program in early winter months and working them through the later hot spring and having to decrease the amount of time we roaded. However, when we got to that weekend trial, there was a huge difference in that dog that was through a program that had worked themselves through and actually been pushed a little bit in an amount of heat stress, that they were able to recover a lot faster than the dogs that had not. And that was really showing, I think, more than anything else that I saw, even in taking muscle mass measurements and heart rates and respiratory rates over time and trying to quantify, seeing simply the difference in either a dog coming in to a kennel that had been conditioned to a dog that had never been conditioned. To see that difference was pretty extreme. And that really showed me more than anything that this is going to make a huge difference for these dogs.
So we talked about conditioning for the purpose of injury prevention, performance enhancement, but what we're talking about here is it may literally save their lives at one day.
Absolutely.
That's big. All right, let me keep going here. How much and what type of exercise is appropriate for young dogs whose growth plates have not closed, and how much is too much?
Another great question. So most large breed dogs, their growth plates are closing around 12 to 14 months of age. Ideally, I prefer to not road dogs until 14 months of age. And again, some dogs, their plates close a lot earlier, but to be safe, I sort of have a blanket statement at 14 months and spend more time conditioning in the water when they're younger. And the other part of it too is their mental attitude as puppies, and doing more work in the water, not under pressure, not under a training atmosphere, helps their attitude, but also helps build overall core strength, which young dogs and puppies have a difficult time with because they don't have a lot of core strength. Their bodies are sort of everywhere in space. They don't have great proprioception. So we do exercises that help to increase strength in puppies, like the ball work, like walking over an air mattress, for instance. Simple things that will help build their core, but is not putting excess stress through their joints. So the more water work, the better in young puppies.
That's really important. I have a senior dog who is almost 12 years old and would like to keep her in condition. How much can I condition a 12-year-old dog?
So again, this is a lot about knowing your dog, but at the same time, I really don't like to push geriatric elderly dogs regardless of their body condition. So in a situation like this, I would probably do more Beco band work with this dog.
Mm-hmm.
I would do more proprioceptive exercises like walking over cavalettis or figure eights through cones, maybe working on a very small balance disc where I'm putting their forelimbs up on the disc just for some simple balance exercise. But I'm definitely not going to push this dog to road or to swim long distances. If anything, it's going to be very short segments, so maybe 2-3 minute swims. Just to keep their core up, and if they're having struggles in the water, even put a life vest on them when they're older. Give them a little bit of that buoyancy that they may have lost, and also may hinder them from swimming more naturally.
I'm going to grab one more question. I had one here that I really liked. So the question is, we talked about all different types of conditioning, and stretching in human conditioning is a big part of the process. We didn't really talk much about stretching. Is that something that we should be considering? Is that something we should be using? Is it something we should be doing prior to competing?
So flexibility is definitely a huge part of conditioning, and I think it's probably the biggest thing we all lack. Human and dog alike, nobody loves to stretch, but it's one of those things we have to be careful with dogs, because for one, we need to make sure their muscles are warm always before stretching.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the one concept that even myself as an athlete in high school was not really known. You know, we would come out and the very first thing the coach would want you to do is stretch before you even run and warm up. And so the warm up and the cool down and the stretch, now in this day and age, we have this research to show us that there is a specific process to this and how important it is to, yes, warm up, cool down, and stretch, but the way we do it is also important. So, for instance, the warm up in a dog. Before we bring the dog to work, to exercise, even walking 5-10 minutes on lead to warm up the body, bring blood flow to the muscles, elevate the heart rate, is so important to prevention of injury.
Mm-hmm.
It's increasing flexibility just in doing that, and extensibility of the soft tissue. And the same way with cooling down. After work, we're bringing the heart rate down slowly as the muscles are still moving. We're not jumping under the truck and laying down. We're moving, our muscles are still contracting, and we're pushing all those waste products out of the soft tissue. That's going to help with ultimately soreness the next day, and again, prevention of decreasing range of motion and flexibility. When it comes to stretching the same way, what's different about dogs is it's difficult to passively stretch a dog and know how much or how little you're actually getting. So in other words, when I say passive stretch, what that means is I am actively stretching the dog for the dog. So I'm taking the limb and extending or flexing myself. In the active forms of stretching, the dog is stretching themselves. So I'll perform exercises like figure eights. Something as simple as using a treat, standing, opening up your legs to the point where the dog can move through your legs in a figure eight pattern. This is a form of active stretching. So they're actually moving their body and flexing and extending every limb. And this is a way for them to actively stretch without you pushing them. Getting on the peanut ball, getting on a tailgate with your forelimbs up, and doing stretches where we raise the head. We call them cookies to the sky, cookies to the side, like we talked about on the peanut. You can do this simply on the tailgate of your truck. And this is a way to actively stretch the dog because the dog is stretching for themselves. However, we're never doing this unless the dog is warm. So making sure we've at least done the warm up, if not doing this after work.
All incredible stuff. We could go on all night. When you say this is just the tip of the iceberg, it literally is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, Janelle and I, are working a little bit possibly on a program that take this into much greater detail. So just stay aware of that. It's something we're hoping to do, because every one of these things we talked about can be talked about in much greater detail, and you feel like, maybe we've only given people a hint of awareness of what is possible. So, great stuff. I can't thank you enough for being here.
Appreciate it.
I can't thank Ray, Carl, all the great guys at Purina enough for promoting dog wellness, great nutrition, and education. This is just the first of multiple Purina Masterclasses we've got planned for 2023. So stay tuned, good night, and thank you for being here.